In this series of videos, we will cover decision trees, how this algorithm is structured mathematically, and how to implement it in Python from scratch. Hi, my name is Michael, and I run a blog called Inside Learning Machines, where I cover topics in data science and machine learning. My aim in this blog is to dive into machine learning algorithms and to explain how they actually work. I've included a link to my blog in the description below. Now, decision trees are a simple and yet intuitive set of machine learning models that lend themselves to not only yield good predictions, but are also highly interpretable. In other words, it is straightforward to understand how the model arrives at the predictions it is able to produce. Decision trees can be used for both classification and regression problems. In addition, decision trees form the basis for some of the most powerful and popular machine learning algorithms. These include random forests, as well as gradient-boosted trees. Both of these are ensembles of decision trees that are built to work together to produce results that are better than what we could expect from any single decision tree. For part 1 of this series, I will discuss the basic idea behind decision trees, the key assumptions and considerations that we need to keep in mind, and the technical details that lie within this algorithm. If you continue through to watching the next series of videos that are part of this sequence, I will cover how to implement the algorithm we discuss here in Python from scratch. Both classification and regression examples will be covered. Okay, so we can start by asking the very basic question, what are decision trees? So decision trees are a sequence of true or false questions that we can ask with regards to a particular data set or problem that we're interested in. So for the case of this slide right here, I want to work through a very simple example where we're going to try and build a decision tree that will make predictions as to whether a particular animal is a mammal or bird. So this is just a very simple example. I'm not considering other types of animals here. It's just for illustrative purposes. So we start by asking an initial question, and in this case, that question is represented by the blue square. We term this the root node of the tree. It is just the first question we ask regarding the data that we have. So this question is, is the animal able to fly? Now this is a true or false question, and so we are going to get an answer from asking this question on the data. And from that, we can ask further questions to get a more accurate prediction on the data. So in this case, our follow-on questions are represented by the orange nodes. And these are what we would call interior nodes to the tree. So these are just further questions that we're asking on the data. So if we answer the first question as true, so if the animal is able to fly, the next question I want to ask is, can the animal lay eggs? Conversely, if the animal is not able to fly, then the next question I'm going to ask is, does the animal have feathers? Now I'm going to limit my questions just to these two sets here. It's just the root node and then our interior nodes. And then based on these answers, then I'm going to generate a prediction. So each of the interior nodes will also have a true or false answer. And then from that, we can arrive at our leaf nodes. And these are drawn here as green squares. Now here, this is where we are going to store our model predictions. So if the animal is able to fly and it can lay eggs, we predict it's a bird. If the animal is able to fly, but it does not lay eggs, then we predict it's a mammal. And an example of this are the bats. Now, if the animal cannot fly, but it does have feathers, we predict it's a bird. And an example of that would be a penguin. If the animal is not able to fly and it does not have feathers, then we predict it's a mammal. So I think this is a fairly straightforward illustration of how a decision tree works. We can now work through a couple examples. So let's take the case of a dog. Let's work through our decision tree to try and predict whether a dog is a mammal or a bird. So starting at the root node, can a dog fly? And the answer to that is no. So we move down to the right. And then our next question is, does a dog have feathers? And the answer to this is also no. So we predict it's a mammal, and that is correct. Our next example is that of a blue jay. And we start it again at the root node, and we can ask, can a blue jay fly? And it can. So we move now to the left. And blue jays do lay eggs. So we again move to the left, and we make a prediction that it's a bird. So this is all, again, that's accurate. And I hope that this illustrates exactly how a decision tree works. Okay, now we can go over some of the key assumptions and considerations for the material that we will cover in this video, and also for when just using decision trees in general. So the first is that in this video, we will only be covering CART models. These are classification and regression trees. This algorithm was developed by Leo et al., 1984. There's other types of decision tree models. However, we will only be limiting ourselves to the CART algorithm. Now, one of the key strengths of decision trees is their simplicity. And in turn, this enables us to interpret these models fairly well. So if we consider the case that we just looked at previously, we built a decision tree that was able to classify animals as being either mammals or birds. And you can draw out how information flows through the tree, how the decision making is done, and it facilitates the ease with which we can interpret how predictions are being made. So if we are in a situation, if we're working on a project where stakeholders are not only interested in having a model that is able to produce accurate predictions, but also we want to be able to explain how those predictions take place, decision trees are a great option for that. Another strength is that typically minimal data preparation is required. So with decision trees, we don't have to concern ourselves with normalizing or scaling the different features in our training data. Now, depending on the implementation, you may have to account for missing or categorical values. There are ways where you can implement a CART decision tree to already account for this without having any pre-processing required to handle these situations. In the description below, I have a link, or I have two links to articles where I have implemented decision trees that handle both of these situations, so you can check that out for yourself. Now, another thing to consider for the specific case where we are building a classification decision tree is that the training data being used on the model consists of classes that are balanced. And that just ensures that we prevent bias from being introduced into the algorithm. So if we do train a decision tree on unbalanced training data, that can introduce bias. So that is one point to be concerned with. Another thing to take note of is that typically CART decision trees are unstable to small variations in the training data, meaning that if we train a decision tree on a certain sample of training data, we can obtain a structure of the tree, the way that the tree, the types of questions that are being asked at different layers within the tree in order to arrive at predictions. That can change if we go ahead and train a new tree on data which is similar but has been changed somewhat or slightly changed. So it should not be too surprising that the two different trees would have a significantly different structure. So it is one point to keep in mind that if we do have variations in the training data, then that can alter the structure of the tree quite significantly. Another thing to point out is that the training algorithm used in CART trees is a greedy algorithm, which means that it will not find a globally optimal solution. So in our training algorithm, for each node in the tree, whether it's the root or one of the interior nodes, the algorithm is trying to figure out what are the best questions to ask that will optimally split the data. But when we say optimally split, we're only doing that in terms of a local sense, not in a global sense. So when we're down, say, at one interior node on the left-hand side, that split is only considering the data that arrives at that node. It does not consider the data that has flown to the other side of the tree. Now, the reason for this is because a greedy algorithm is more computationally efficient. Trying to devise an algorithm that provides a globally optimal solution is just not computationally efficient. And finally, for data sets where there are a large number of features, overfitting can be a problem. Typically, we deal with that by using some sort of dimensionality reduction technique prior to training the tree. So an example of this would be to do principal component analysis on the training data prior to using it to build our trees. So now we'll go over the details for how we build a decision tree during training. The next couple of slides will be more technical than what we have discussed previously. So first, let's go over the training data that we have available. This will consist of a column vector y with a total of n elements to it, and a matrix X, which has a total of n rows, which correspond to each element in y, and a total of m columns. So we have a total of m predictor features. Each column in X represents a different predictor feature. So we have a total of m within our data set. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is combine these two into a single matrix D. So D has the complete set of predictor features, of the m predictor features in our data. That's just X. And then on top of that, we attach an extra column Y for our labels. Now the actual training procedure will start at the root node, and then we work successively down through each successive interior node that results from the root. And the question we ask ourselves at every node is, what should we use as a split point for the data that arrives at the node? So in a mathematical sense, this is what I'm talking about. We have D. We can think of D as being the data that arrives at a given node. And we need to work out a way of splitting D into two different matrices, into D left and D right. Now this split is based off of one of the predictor features within D, and that we denote as F star, and a specific scalar value with which we compare all the values within F star. So that scalar value is what I have here in italics. It's the X F star value. This is a scalar. And so we're going to compare all the values in F star, and that's this column vector, this bold X, that just represents a single column vector within D. And we're going to do this comparison, and all the values for F star that are less than or equal to our threshold, XF star, we allocate to the left. Conversely, all the values within our feature F star that are greater than our cutoff XF star, we allocate to the right. And this split is done on a row basis. So D left, and D right all have the same number of columns. It's just the number of rows changes. So the way that we're going to determine what should we use as F star and XF star will be just simply by looping through all the possible combinations, and we will compute what is called an impurity for every single combination. So this is just a very mechanical approach to tackling this problem. The impurity is given by this equation. So the impurity is given here by I node P, and it is equal to the proportion, the number of rows that have been allocated to the left divided by the total number of rows that have arrived at the node. And when I talk about number of rows, I'm talking about the number of rows in D, so the number of rows in the data at the node, multiplied by IP. And now this function, this is an impurity function that has a single input, which is the data matrix that has arrived at the node. So in this case, it is D left. And we add to that the proportion of samples that have been allocated to the right, and we multiply it by the result of this impurity function again. So we compute this value for every single combination of F star and XF star. And with that, we just simply pick out the pair that gives us the lowest value of the impurity. And in effect, F star and XF star are the model parameters that we are seeking to learn during training. Now we stop this whole process if A, all the labels that arrive at a given node have the same value, in which case there's no longer any sense in splitting the data, or B, a model limit is reached, and that is usually specified through a hyperparameter of one sort or the other. Most typically, this is controlled through a parameter that defines the maximum depth to the tree, or the maximum number of times that we can do a partitioning of the data. And so once we've reached that limit, we simply compute the terminal values, which are the values that we will use as a prediction. So that is for our leaf nodes, and then we just simply store them. Now, you noticed in the previous slide that we had this function IP, and I didn't talk about it too much. The reason for that is because IP depends on whether we are dealing with a classification or a regression problem. So first, let's look at the classification case. we can start by working out the proportion of labels of a given class C that have arrived at the node. So we simply sum up each instance or each occurrence of class C at a given node divided by the number of samples at the node, and that gives us this parameter P node C. And now we can compute an impurity either through the Gini impurity, so we can work out IP as being the sum over all the classes within our training data multiplied by P node C multiplied by 1 minus P node C. Or alternatively, we can use the Shannon entropy, and that is equal to the negative sum over all classes P node C multiplied by log base 2 of P node C. So we have two different options for how we can compute the impurity for classification. Now, alternatively, for regression, we're going to define our IP function differently. First, we're going to compute the mean value of our label. So our labels are yi, and we're just going to sum over all the values of our labels at a particular node divided by the total number of labels we have at that node. So we get that mean value. And then one option for the impurity is to either compute the mean squared error, and that's given by this. So we take the difference between each label value and that mean that we just computed, and we square it and sum it over all the values at our node divided by the total number of data points at the node. Or alternatively, we can compute a mean absolute error. And so again, we sum over all the data points at the node, but here now we just take the absolute difference between our mean and the individual label, yi, and then we divide that by the total number of instances at the node. If you enjoyed this content, please like the video or subscribe to the channel. If you would like to learn more about decision trees and machine learning in general, please visit my site insidelearningmachines.com. I've included a link to my article on decision trees in the description below. In part 2 of this series, I will begin the implementation of the decision tree algorithm discussed here in this video into Python code. Don't forget to check out that video. Have a great day, and see you in the next video.